This year's symposium honors the Palm Springs School of Desert Modernism, firmly establishing the Palm Springs School as a unique and special architectural movement. Today's speakers are featured in a new book, The Palm Springs School, Desert Modernism, 1934-1975, published by Rizzoli this year, and written by Alan S. and spearheaded by the Palm Springs Architectural Alliance. Sydney will cover more related to the program and the book in a few moments. On my end, I just wanted to update you a little bit about what we believe we want to do with architecture and design at the Palm Springs Art Museum. I will be very short because I just want to mention that as part of the Architecture and Design Center vision that we've been developing, we are hoping and aiming at bringing the architecture and design for front and center, not only in the Architecture and Design Center, but also making sure that we have regularly inside of our main building architecture and design related show. As all of you know, architecture and design are front and center in Palm Springs, and we are many to come visit regularly the city from abroad, from different states, and we really want to make sure that anytime we have visitors, we can share with them the fascinating history and architecture that has been developed in Palm Springs since 1920s and until these days. So we will make sure that we can cater to this expectation in the forthcoming years. Well, again, I want to thank our partners, the Palm Springs Architectural Alliance. I want to thank Modernism Week for their continued support and, well, their excellent partnership with the museum, all today's speakers, our staff and volunteers, and all of you for being a part of our extended A+D family. None of that would be possible without all the founders and benefactors of the A&D Center. So again, a huge thank you to all of you. And now, please welcome on stage Sydney Williams.
Everyone. Christine is a force, and we're so glad to have her in Palm Springs. Isn't she fabulous? We're so excited to have you here today, and thank you for coping with the traffic and the closed roads and all, and for the slight delay in starting. But we're so thrilled to come to this day to celebrate this very special book, this publishing of the Palm Springs School of Desert Modernism, 1934 to 1975. Producers of the book, the Palm Springs Architectural Alliance, is grateful to the museum, to Christine, to Louisa, to Daniela, and all the tech staff that have made this run so smoothly. The book itself is an extraordinary example of partnering, starting with Modernism Week, a staunch supporter. The Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, the Palm Springs Modern Committee, the Palm Springs Historical Society, Sunnylands, the Preservation Mirage, and many individuals and homeowners contributed generously to this effort. Some of you may not know what PSAA does and what it is. Formed in 2020 by Dick Burkett, Deborah Hovel, Richard Hovel, and me, PSAA includes the local organizations who are focused on preservation, education, and advocacy. Our goal is to identify projects that benefit the community and celebrate the legacy of architecture in the Coachella Valley. These projects include producing a book recognizing the Palm Springs School of Architecture, working with College of the Desert and Cal Poly Pomona to establish a 5-year architecture degree at the new Palm Springs COD campus. And thirdly, to work with the City of Palm Springs in creating substantive design guidelines. So we are here today to celebrate the launch of the Palm Springs School Book, and to all of you who participated and made it happen. Choosing the outstanding architecture writer Alan Hess as the author was a great start. Then inviting SAS, yes. Then inviting SAS George Thomas, Jan Winship, Ken Lyon, Christine Madrid French, and Eddie Jones rounded out our list of stars. So the work, yes, indeed. So the work of the incomparable Janice Lyle as managing editor, archivist Frank Lopez, researcher Melissa Ritchie, copy editor Stephen Biller, our agent Diana Murphy, and our New York publicist Danny Copel made the book possible. A round for them. We also need to acknowledge the talents of Tom Dahl, our graphic designer, and to Palm Springs Life for their support in the program and advertising. So we have a full program today, and we want to get started. In your program, you will find the extensive biographies. Actually, they're quite shortened from the real biographies, but they're long. So they're impressive. So we're not going to go through all of that, but right now I'd like to introduce Alan Hess, who is our author and keynote speaker. He participated in a symposium here in 2014 entitled Sand and Sea, Modernism in Palm Springs and Sarasota. I think some of you may have been here then. Alan suggested it was time that the architects who practice in Palm Springs should be identified in the same way as the Sarasota School, the Prairie School, the Chicago School, and so on. More than 10 years later, here we are, after authoring numerous books on architecture, including several on Frank Lloyd Wright, on Googie architecture, and many more. Alan's concept has become a reality. So please join me in giving Alan a great big warm welcome.
Good morning. It's so great to see so many people here and so many faces that I've known through the years as I've been coming to Palm Springs and across America, because this is my third book on Palm Springs. I started with Palm Springs Weekend with Andrew Danish, which was 20 years ago, I believe. And then the second one, Julius Schulman, Palm Springs, with Michael Stern. So I really was very much pleased when the Palm Springs Architectural Alliance suggested another book, because there's always more to uncover about Palm Springs. As I was writing this, things that I had not really realized or things that I had known about, but suddenly they rose in significance, so that things, to tell a more pointed and prominent story about what was going on here. Things took on new significance as I thought about them again for the third time in this book. And I am really, really pleased also that there are so many great historians, researchers, writers working right now on new material about Palm Springs, the Coachella Valley, Down Valley, the architects, beyond the handful of architects that we know so well. There is such a vibrant community here interested, and trust me, the Palm Springs area has the material, the ideas, the significance, if I may say so, the profoundness to support this sort of investigation, research, and discussion. That's what I'm really glad about today with our other, with three of our essayists to talk about their particular perspectives, because I'm hoping that this book, the symposium, will spark a discussion here in Palm Springs, but also beyond, nationally. What was going on here in the mid-century, fairly sequestered, fairly unknown, basically, actually presented so many ideas about modern architecture, modern city planning, and what direction it should go, that today we have just a great deal more to be able to bring to today's discussion of architectural issues. Just one, of course, is the impact of extreme climate. How did the architects here in Palm Springs address that? It's something that is very relevant today throughout the world, and Palm Springs, the Palm Springs School, has something to contribute to that discussion. And I'm looking forward to finding out what that is going to be all about. So let's get started with my slides here. There are a number of themes here. When I started the book, whatever I thought about Palm Springs architecture, I had to kind of lay aside because new material presented me with a new story about Palm Springs and all of our favorite architects out here. So I invite you to kind of lay aside perhaps whatever your current opinions are about. Listen to the talks today, if you can, read the book, look at the photographs in it, and rethink what this place was all about. For example, here is Albert Frey's map of two of his cross-country journeys from New York to California in 1932 and 1934. Just looking at this, what did Albert Frey look at? After he left New York, you can see that he went to Cleveland, then Detroit, car capital of the world, on to Chicago, across the Great Plains, out to San Francisco, down the coast. Also that zigzagging line that you see through Arizona and New Mexico, visiting the pueblos, the indigenous architecture of the Southwest. All of these things, the industrial might of Chicago and Detroit, and these indigenous answers found in the American Southwest. He put those all together, and it had a huge impact on his work. Anyway, this is a very informative map to start our talk today. What did he decide after those journeys and seeing what California was presenting in the 1930s? Largely unremarked about in the architectural journals or academies, but he kept, of course, in touch with his former employer, Le Corbusier, back in Paris. They wrote letters back and forth, thank goodness, and those are in the great collection here at the Palm Springs Art Museum. Here is what I kind of gelled down, that he wrote back in 1935. New York is not America, Americans say. The East Coast of the U.S. is still quite European, enlarged to grotesque proportions. It is in the new towns out west, established during the evolution of the automobile, where modern American life is found. From somebody like Albert Frey, I'm going to listen to this. If he thought that what was going on out here in the West was important, and certainly influencing him, I want to know what that was all about. That is in the background picture of the Miracle Mile in Los Angeles, Wilshire Boulevard, again, a new planning idea that this new town out west had developed. Albert Frey was open to all of that. So, going back, big picture, what is modernism all about? What distinguishes it? How do we define it? And what was the contribution of America to the invention of modern architecture? Well, to me, just to kind of make it simple, It is a combination of contrasts. On the one side, organic architecture, about nature, learning lessons from nature, about organization, about materials, about man's connection to the natural landscape as well. Of course, this was greatly explored in the entire movement of organic architecture in America. Here you see Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin West in Scottsdale, in the desert. Natural materials rising out of the earth, shelter overhead, a high-tech shelter, in this case a wood and canvas structure to protect against the elements. Earthy, warm, colorful. On the other hand, as modernism developed in America, there was industrial America. Henry Ford, the industrial world of Detroit and the entire Midwest, really, at that time. America changing the world. Now, nature and industry, they seem to be in conflict. They're two different worlds. But no, American modern architecture, as it evolved, and I might say long before the Bauhaus was founded in 1919 in Germany, developing from the period after the Civil War, and developing through Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright and all of his progeny as well. How do you bring these two contrasts together? That, to me, is the fascinating thing about what American modern architecture was all about. The architects of this developed in many different directions. There's no one answer. In Chicago, of course, rebuilding after the Great Chicago Fire, using new technology, steel, glass in particular. For example, at the Reliance building in Chicago by Burnham and Root, the amount of glass in that little building, what we now think of as little probably, it was a skyscraper at the time. The amount of glass was astonishing to people at that time. The sizes of the glass and how much of the facade was a curtain wall of glass framed in steel. It was startling at the time. But again, combining these two things, nature, light, sunlight, and technology through glass and steel. And of course, Frank Lloyd Wright, the Roby House as well, protecting itself against the Chicago climate, cold in winter, hot in summer. And his forms grew out of that dilemma. How do you make a house comfortable in winter and in summer in a place, extreme climate like Chicago? In so defining, and so answering that question, Frank Lloyd Wright helped to invent an entirely new architecture, modern architecture. In other places, these ideas took different forms. In Connecticut, the Harvard Five, we had the premiere of the new documentary on the Harvard Five just the other night here at Modernism Week. Modernism Week, a place to come if you're looking for new ideas, new material, new research into what modern architecture was actually about. Down in Florida, in Sarasota, a place, of course, which was a beautiful climate like Palm Springs, a recreational economy like Palm Springs. The Sarasota School, headed by Paul Rudolph, developed any number of new ways for modern technology to make living in a natural environment more easy, more pleasant. Here in Palm Springs, of course, we had our own answers to that question as well. Everything from the organic architecture of John Lautner at the Elrod House, for example, to the technological response of Richard Neutra at the Kaufman House, and everything in between. Any number of variations of how you combine those two things, concern for nature, concern for technology, and so forth, in the other great architects who are working here in that period of time. Well, I didn't want to this morning just repeat what you'll hopefully be able to read in the book yourself. So I thought, what should I really can focus on? Well, I'm going to focus on my own discoveries. I mentioned, as I dived once again into this material, suddenly certain buildings rose to the surface, and I realized, look, that's key. That was a change point. It added a new idea. Or here was this architect that I didn't realize contributed as much as they did. So I'm basically going to just talk about my own discoveries in the process of writing this book. And again, I thank the Palm Springs Architectural Alliance for the opportunity to return to this material. It is so rich. There's so much to it. Discovery number one, organic modern architecture. In this case, I had known about the Oasis Hotel forever, but I suddenly realized that this Oasis Hotel was built by Lloyd Wright, son of Frank Lloyd Wright, opening in 1924, was not only the first modern architecture in the city of Palm Springs, but one of the most significant modern buildings built in that decade anywhere in the world, because it brought together these ideas of nature and new technology into an entirely new form, and a mature form. The way that Lloyd Wright brought those all together into this hotel as it originally was built is extraordinary. It deserves to be better known. He used a system of slip-form concrete construction, which had been invented fairly recently at that time. It was mostly used for agricultural buildings. Lloyd Wright saw the possibilities for it. In this sort of construction, you lay down the form boards on the perimeter of the building, about 1 foot high or so, and you pour in the concrete and put in the reinforcing. You let it set, and then you use exactly the same form very efficiently. You slip them up, put them in place, and you pour another level, and so forth as you build the entire building. It goes up, of course, to the top of the tower in this case. Modern technology to create a concrete building. A concrete building was important because thick concrete walls protect against the heat, and they also retain heat in the wintertime when you have a fire, for example, warming the building. But it's not only that. Lloyd Wright included an aesthetic answer. He showed how the construction method, the slip-form concrete, developed the ornament, the detail, the architecture of the entire building. That's what all those horizontal lines are. Each one of those is a separate pour of the concrete. So he used the concrete construction method to give the building its decorative and delightful atmosphere. The building has an interesting role in terms of preservation because half of it was torn down in the 1950s for what we now consider another landmark of Palm Springs architecture, the Oasis office building by the Williams & Williams firm. So we have that dilemma. A really important building was half torn down for another really important building. That's another dilemma for us to discuss another time. But this building is extremely important. It isn't cared for very well today. It's mostly boarded up. But the room wing is still there. The tower is still there. Don't ignore it. Go and hug it. You know, it's an important building. It definitely needs our love as well. But why is it important to Palm Springs? Because it started a thread throughout Palm Springs modern architecture. The influence of organic modern architecture, going back to Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan, bringing architecture into nature, nature into architecture. So, for example, Bill Cody, at the Del Marcos Hotel echoes what Frank Lloyd Wright was doing at Taliesin West in the desert as well, with the stone walls and the angular design. Later on, about 10 years later, Bill Cody designs the Springs restaurant. No longer there, but again, one of the most important buildings ever built in Palm Springs, in my opinion. This was really the most sophisticated Googie building built anywhere in the United States at the heyday of Googie architecture. Googie architecture, of course, is the roadside architecture, responding to the automotive lifestyle of those of the mid-20th century as well. But in the angles, in the form, in the upper right-hand corner is the plan of that. This is 1958, I believe. Look at that plan. You did not see a major architect dealing with these obtuse angles, these extraordinary forms, and creating beautiful spaces inside using these angular models, until 20 years later, Frank Gehry also was working on those. But it started, those ideas were being workshopped right here in Palm Springs in the mid-20th century. This is kind of the architectural ferment of that period. Of course, in terms of modern organic architecture, John Lautner, the Desert Hot Springs Motel, the Elrod House, and the Bob Hope House, carrying on this tradition of organic modern architecture, key part of the Palm Springs School. It leads up to the Doolittle House by Kendrick Bangs Kellogg as well, out in Yucca Valley as well, using concrete, using organic forms, fitting into the organic landscape as well. This is part of the discovery that I had, realizing just how important those organic ideas were in the Palm Springs School. Discovery number 2, industrial modern America. This is a picture of the opening of La Plaza right here in the center of town. A really interesting, multi-use, auto-oriented, pedestrian-oriented development, and really at the heart of the town at that time. It had shops, it had a garage, it had a hotel, it had restaurants, it had landscaping, it had courtyards, and it had a theater as well, La Plaza Theater. Modern technology, radio, and movies. And who's responsible for this? Well, the woman there is Julia Carnell. She was a member of the National Cash Register family back in Dayton, Ohio. Very wealthy woman, and she vacationed here in Palm Springs. Back in Dayton, Ohio, her National Cash Register had hired Harry Williams to be their architect for many buildings. And that is Harry Williams standing behind Julia Carnell at the opening of La Plaza. Now, I'd always known of Harry Williams. He was the father of E. Stewart Williams and Roger Williams. And of course, here we are in E. Stewart Williams, Annenberg Theater, important architect. But what his presence here and his work, Harry Williams' work, connects Palm Springs with that American industrial modern architecture of the Midwest, of Detroit, of great architects like Albert Kahn, who designed the factories for Henry Ford that allowed him to manufacture literally hundreds of thousands of automobiles at an affordable price for the average American. Extraordinary part of American modern architecture, this industrial modernism. And Harry Williams, back in Dayton, Ohio, built buildings like this. Notice the amount of glass, simple structure for a laboratory building. Very much like what Albert Kahn was doing in Detroit. But who were his clients? His clients were the corporate oligarchy of the time. General Motors, National Cash Register, and I was fascinated to learn the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright. Harry Williams designed airfields and other buildings for the Wright brothers. and you just don't get more modern than the Wright brothers. That defines what this new century was becoming and what was being invented at that time. Where does that have an impact on Palm Springs? In the mass-produced housing of Twin Palms by Palmer and Kreisel, and the steel houses of Wexler and Harrison as well. Taking that American industrial know-how, steel and glass, new materials, and applying them to what? Housing. Housing at the time, an affordable price. So you see this thread as we have the thread of the organic architecture, we have the thread of this industrial architecture. Aesthetically also, this went on to the glass houses of Palm Springs. Now, everybody knows the Edith Farnsworth house by Mies van der Rohe as the glass house. That and Philip Johnson's house, the glass houses. Such iconic visions of modern architecture. Square boxes, out of steel, rimmed in glass. Well, here in Palm Springs, we took the glass house a step further. In, for example, in the lower photograph, Easter Women's own house as well, and in Bill Cody's house in the upper right-hand corner. Except we didn't maintain the glass box as a glass box. We exploded it. We opened it out to the landscape. Still glass, still connecting indoors and outdoors. You don't really quite know where you are. If you're outdoors, you feel like you're indoors. If you're indoors, you feel like you're outdoors. In these expressions of the glass house as defined by the Palm Springs School. Another discovery, the desert as muse. I'm just taking one example here of Albert Frey, and how did the desert affect him? We saw the map, we saw how much he traveled, and we know that he photographed the American Southwest, the desert, and its architecture, both industrial and indigenous. Now, the Illuminaire House, which of course sits right here on the property of the Palm Springs Museum, is a wonderful example of industrial modern architecture. Steel and glass and aluminum and skeletal framework as well. Where did he get those ideas? Well, he had just, in the past couple of years before this was built in 1931, he'd been working with Le Corbusier. He had worked on the Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier as well, which defined the European view of industrial modern architecture. The roof terrace, open to the air. It's a Corbusian idea, lifting the house off the ground. Corbusian idea. So Frey was definitely influenced by Corbu. Some 20 years later, though, after living in Palm Springs, what is he designing? Frey House 1, which he remodels as he goes along. The shapes, the colors, the indoor-outdoor spaces, the way it attaches itself to the land and the pool and surrounds itself with high industrial steel and modern plastic verandas and porches and so forth. He's going in a completely different direction. This is not a Corbusian building. This is a Frey building after living in the Palm Springs area, participating, though he didn't know it at the time, participating in the Palm Springs School of Ideas as well. The desert has this effect. You can go to the other architects and see how living, working in the desert, the conditions here, has changed each of these architects. Discovery number 4. Palm Springs is known for its luxurious, glamorous estates like Sunnylands, the Annenberg estate, of course. And this is a part of our heritage and tradition. But what it doesn't get as much attention is our small houses. Here are 3 examples. Frey 2, in the upper right-hand corner, Robson Chambers' own house in the lower right-hand corner, and John Porter Clark's house as well. These are tiny little houses using modern technology as well to create really delightful residential spaces that connect to the outdoor area, the climate, breezes, sunlight, and all of that. These are remarkable little laboratories of small house design, another issue that we are facing today. And we have examples right here. Discovery number 5, modernism discovers pleasure. On the left is an apartment house by Le Corbusier in Germany from the 1920s. Strict, efficient, well designed, but where is the note of pleasure? And again, I've loved this photograph by Julia Schulman for a long time. The yacht club down at the Salton Sea by, again, Albert Frey as well. Colorful, shapely forms, flags flying overhead, portals looking out at the vista, and of course recreational boats and water skiing and all of that. It's part of that culture, which is part of Palm Springs as well. And all of the architects, the other great example is the Springs, Huddle's Restaurant by Bill Cody. Palm Springs introduced the idea of pleasure to modern architecture. Yes, you could be delightful, you could be fanciful, you could be colorful, and still be really important and workable modern architecture. Now, I've been talking about Palm Springs and the Palm Springs School, of course, but the Southwest itself was a laboratory of modern architecture. We are only one center, an important center, because of the talent that we had here and the amount of money that we had here to try out these experiments on a very small, contained scale here in this small city at that time. But I want you to remember that similar experiments were going on throughout the American Southwest. Here are just 2 examples. In Tucson, the lower left-hand corner, Arthur Brown creating this house for 2 school teachers. It's a double house. They each had their side of the house. But for the son there, he had these movable steel tubing and corrugated metal shades that could be moved around the house as the sun moved around the house. Very inventive. Tucson. And of course, Al Beadle, who actually was a partner at one point with William Cody on a couple of buildings, both here in Palm Springs and in the Phoenix area. The White Gates House by Al Beadle as well, using, again, sunscreens as part of the integral part. And there's artwork, murals, abstract murals integrated into the house. Experiments that we know here in Palm Springs were going on in Phoenix, in Las Vegas, in Reno, in Albuquerque, in El Paso. Really, you can go even as far as Kansas City and Salt Lake City. The entire Southwest, which of course is growing in population throughout the mid-20th century, providing clients, providing new types of buildings for a new type of life here in the American Southwest. Palm Springs and the Palm Springs School, I think, is the kind of the heart and the core of those ideas. But it was going on all over the place. Discovery number 7, as I was looking at all these buildings. Again, we're known for our beautiful homes, residential architecture. But we're also designing, at the top, churches and banks, in the middle, gas stations and schools, at the bottom, supermarkets and city halls. The architects of the mid-20th century of the Palm Springs School were designing for an entire city, not just one type of building, the house, but an entire new modern city, and using the same principles that they use. Because what brings the Palm Springs School architects together, you can look at the variety of shapes, materials, uses here throughout the city of Palm Springs at that time. And look at all of the architects, different. They had, each had their own idea about architecture. But what was bringing them together, what did link them, It was approaching, solving the problems of the climate, combining the architecture with nature, the recreational economy of the American Southwest that was developing at that time. All of these things are, each of them were trying to solve that problem in a different way. That's the fascinating thing about the Palm Springs School. The Sarasota School was really very prominently led by Paul Rudolph, who was a major architect. The architects here, Wexler, Cody, Frey, Williams, and Capter, Palmer and Kreisel, Lautner, all the people working here, were all colleagues, more equals, a college of equals, you might say, in solving, addressing these problems. Discovery number 8. In 1932, Alfred Barr wrote in the catalog of the 1932 Museum of Modern Art exhibition on international style. He wrote, "We are asked to take seriously the architectural tastes of real estate speculators, rental agents, and mortgage brokers!" Exclamation point. This was the attitude of really the East Coast establishment about architecture, that commercial architecture was kind of secondary. It was below the radar, really, not really as important as the great civic monuments or skyscrapers or houses of the international style. Well, I don't really agree with that. Commercial architecture has contributed incredible, inventive architecture to our to modernism. And here in particular, in Palm Springs, there were 3 women who were clients leading this in the early days. Pearl McManus. Here you see Pearl McManus digging part of the foundation of the Oasis Hotel. This is Lloyd Wright here. This is Austin McManus at the very beginning of the Oasis Hotel. Or Julia Carnell, as I mentioned before, being the client of Harry Williams. Harry Williams did quite a lot here. And of course, Nellie Kaufman of the Desert Inn Motel right here. But we also had developers, builders like Robert and George Alexander, you see on the right, or Cliff Henderson, who was the developer of the Palm Desert area as well. These people were trying out new ideas because there are discoveries to come that we need to address that look to what was here and not really understanding what was here. There's still more to be discovered. I'm going to suggest just a few. Well, we need more research on John Porter Clark. He himself, besides being Albert Frey's partner, had some very distinctive successes. Richard Harrison, also partner of Donald Wexler. We need more research and understand how he fit into it. Other architects working in this area. Michael Black, very interesting architect. This is a bank down in Palm Desert. But he worked with the Agua Caliente tribe and also the black community on the north side of town as well. Very socially conscious architect. Walter White, we do know something about him thanks to Volker Welter's books, but there's still more. And then Harry Williams as well. This is a house right underneath Frey 2. It's a concrete house designed by Harry Williams. But as I said, with this important connection between industrial America and natural, organic America, Harry Williams is somebody we need to know more about. Other inventions, or not always inventions, but things which were applied and perfected here in Palm Springs were the planned unit development, like down in Palm Desert, Palmer and Kreisel's, creating an entire block, but not according to the street grid, creating its own courtyards with the bungalows around it. Or the garden apartment as well. This is Villa Hermosa, by Albert Frey, but the garden apartment is an important style, type of building that was invented, developed, perfected here in Palm Springs. Well, to end up, that is Esther McCoy standing next to the pool at Frey 2. And she was a great inspiration to me, a great writer, observer, author, critic. She helped the world understand the importance of Richard Neutra and of Rudolf Schindler and other California architecture. But she had a hard time explaining to the East Coast media, architectural media, what was going on out here. Few of the East Coast critics came out to see what was going on. Almost none of them came to Palm Springs ever at that period of time to discover what was going on here. And she had a hard time selling to them articles on our architects. So she wrote at one point, most of the messages sent west to east get jumbled at the Rockies. There was something that just did not connect, did not register. But this is the importance of today. This is the importance, I think, of the Palm Springs School book, because that is our job. Today, we have the job of taking the lessons and the beauties of the Palm Springs School architects and making sure that those lessons are not lost. We have to tell our own story. We don't have to wait for an editor back east to come and discover what's here. We have the potential for proclaiming, researching, documenting, and disseminating our own story. That's part of what the purpose of this book is. And I will say that Palm Springs, in my opinion, having coming here for decades now, is in a great position to do that. We have a remarkable infrastructure, the museum here, and its great efforts and exhibits on modern architecture and its archives. Palm Springs Modernism Week, bringing tens of thousands of people from around the world to look at Palm Springs. But then we have the great preservation groups that battle and fortunately sometimes win, sometimes unfortunately lose, but make an effort to inform the public about the value of good architecture and to fight for the examples when they are being threatened. We have, as I mentioned earlier, any number of incredibly insightful and good researchers who are still digging through the material. What we have here is the potential for, I believe, a world-class architectural center, like the Canadian Centre for Architecture, or the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts, or on a cultural basis, Art Basel, or the Aspen Ideas Festival. Bringing the ideas, the energy, the passion of Palm Springs to the world. If we all kind of have that vision, realize what is the potential here, what have we done before that we can carry on into the future. There's a lot that we can do. I would say that we have a unique perspective here in the West, which is different than the perspective that great architects like Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier, Walter Gropius, had looking from Europe towards the New World. We here in the edge of the New World have a unique perspective. The Palm Springs School distills those ideas. We just need to let more people know about it. So we can have an impact on architecture and design far beyond the Coachella Valley. So I will just return at last to Albert Frey's journey and what he looked at. And to take his quote again, It is in the new towns out west where modern American life is found. And it still is. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was so inspired. I think we're all ready to march. Thank you for your insights, for your discoveries, and for writing such an incredible book for us to really highlight the incredible architecture and legacy of Palm Springs. But we also want to highlight the possibilities of the future, and I think you inspired us to go forward on that idea as well. So now it's my pleasure to introduce George Thomas. A cultural and architectural historian, George Thomas wrote an insightful essay in the book on the history of resorts, a focus of his research. While primarily working as a consultant, he taught at Bryn Mawr College and the University of Pennsylvania, concluding his academic career with 12 years as co-director of the Cultural Conservation Program at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. It is a great pleasure to welcome him here from Philadelphia. Please give a warm welcome to George Thomas.
So, a little history. First of all, C.N. Winship advised me that the worst thing in the world, I think that's not my first slide, it looks like my last slide. The worst thing in the world is to have to follow Alan Hess. And I can see, of course, why that is. But I'll try to soldier on. A bit of background about myself. I'm the child of a Navy family. I was born in San Francisco. I've lived from the Atlantic coast from North Carolina to Newfoundland. So I've always been living, it turned out, in basically places that people went to for resorts. That's right. The result is that as I look back on my own career, in which I spent the first 3 years of avoiding writing my dissertation by writing a book about Cape May, and doing research on Frank Furness, and then finally focusing on my own dissertation on Will Price and the Traymore Hotel in Atlantic City. I've also been studying resorts, and they've been a big part of the narrative that I have been part of for all of my career. So today I want to try to cover in 20 minutes, 18 minutes, 2,000 years of resorts, beginning, of course, with where we are today in Palm Springs. I want to remind you that resorts began with some sort of an amenity and with some sort of purpose, and often it was as curing disease. Pre-modern medicine, people had to figure out how did you make yourself comfortable while you were uncomfortable. And hot springs warmed joints, and the ocean airs cooled your temperature and made you feel better. And so resorts were often sort of an environmental adaptation to human ill. And you saw that in hot springs resorts at Saratoga, Atlantic City's Ocean Breezes, and of course Palm Springs. There were also places of pleasure. Cape May sold itself as the city of gladness. Newport, Rhode Island was a perfected suburb. You went to resorts for fishing or for golf or for other types of recreation. And finally, if you didn't have regulations, you could sell your own sin. Las Vegas was good at that. The first of the great Western resorts was Bath in England, where the Romans had discovered hot springs, which they were familiar with in Italy, and made a hot springs spa for the Roman soldiers at the time that were rediscovered in the medieval years and then turned into the resort of Bath in the 17th century when the so-called Great Road made it possible to get from London all the way to Bath in the heroic speed of 17 hours. But Bath figured things out. Bath realized that it wasn't just enough to have a hot spring. You also had to create the amenities that were the character of why you came to a resort year after year after year, even if you didn't feel badly. And so the baths turned into architectural treasures. They created architectural forms, the various crescents that were rented to rich people coming in for the season. They created the assembly rooms where people got together and children met other children and family connections were made and marriages were made. All those things are part of what resorts are about. They're places that you go to over and over again and that become part of your life. America, settled from the Atlantic coast largely by Europeans, found few of these amenities. There were very few hot springs on the East Coast. Well, the hot springs are primarily, as you see here, on the west. It's an interesting map. The red springs are too hot to stand, and so they're not very useful, and the very light yellow are too cool to actually do what is necessary. And so the orange ones are the ones that matter. Over on the eastern part of the United States, there were a few that were just hot enough, one of which was in Saratoga, which was close enough to American centers of population that a resort began to appear in the early 19th century, which you see in the image on the right. Big problem in America was that it was so spread out. And these wonderful rates of travel from the census maps of the 1890s show you that you could get from New York City to Saratoga in 5 days by coach. So if you're going to Saratoga, you needed a month because you were going to spend 10 days getting there and coming back, and then 20 days that you could hang out. It was an innovation in transportation that made it possible to suddenly turn Saratoga from more than a few cabins in a hot spring to a resort with hotels. And that was Robert Fulton's invention of the steamboat, which made it possible to get all the way from New York to Saratoga in 2 days, and all of a sudden a week visit was possible. By the 1870s, railroads made the connection between New York City and Saratoga in 8 hours. And that led to an enormous boom in big hotels and big events, the Belmont Stakes and horse racing. This becomes the center of a whole new type of sort of glamorous, modern Gilded Age culture that Saratoga still represents. Getting to the ocean from the mid-Atlantic was equally hard. Cape May was at the very southern tip of New Jersey. Its name doesn't tell you particularly about it other than that it's a cape, but it was still a place that you could get to in 2 days of kidney-shattering, bone-rattling stagecoaches, which meant that the market for Cape May as a resort was extremely limited. It was the same type of thing. At least a week had to be there. Mostly you went there for a month or two, and it wasn't a particularly great experience getting there or being there. But again, a steamboat down the Delaware River got rid of the vagaries of time and wind and meant that you could arrive in Cape May in basically 8 hours, have the evening and 2 or 3 days of a weekend, and go back, or you could stay for the summer, but the steamboat transforms that. With various canals, all of a sudden Baltimore and Washington, and with ocean access via New York, Cape May becomes really the East Coast's premier resort because people can get there comfortably and relatively easily. Transportation is central to these stories, and you always have to look and say, what's going on? What made these places? And transportation innovations are going to be critical. With the steamboat and the national access, Cape May begins to build big hotels. They're not particularly nice hotels. The rooms are described as plank walls between the various rooms, so you could certainly hear everything that was going on from room to room. Cape May suddenly realized that the world was changing around it when they learned that a gigantic railroad was to be built between Atlantic City and Philadelphia that was going to compete with Cape May. And so they tried by building the world's largest wood frame 4-story, 4-city block front hotel, the Mount Vernon that was illustrated in the London Illustrated News in 1853 as the largest hotel in the world that was to come, wood buildings had a problem. In 1856, the building burned to the ground at the end of the first really open season for it, killing the hotel owner and his family. And at the same moment, the railroad was completed between Philadelphia and Atlantic City, making it possible to get from Philadelphia to the coast in 2 hours. And all of a sudden, it was clear that the far better named were about the Atlantic Ocean, let's call it Atlantic City, had figured out what you would do to sell an experience. And it then became the great American resort with its own Broadway and the boardwalk as a scene for mass tourist experiences with rows of fantastical high skyscraper hotels lining the boardwalk, making it what it called the city by the sea. And the original planners had done a brilliant thing. They named the streets for the world's oceans and for the American states and their capitals, so that they made it a place that was welcoming to the entire country, whereas Cape May had most of its streets were named for local landowners. You know, there was a Hughes Street and a Morris Street and streets that didn't mean anything to anyone other than to the people who had founded it. And it's because Atlantic City is a national resort that when they're looking for a place to center a game about real estate, the Monopoly Board is centered in Atlantic City because it was a place that everybody knew. The counter to Atlantic City in the mass resort is Newport. Newport could be accessed from Boston, from New York, by steam launch in an overnight journey that was itself relatively pleasurable, and it drew people from the entire Atlantic coast to create a new type of resort of gigantic cottages designed by important architects in suburban settings, with the industry of the town being a resort. That becomes the business of a resort as opposed to an auxiliary to some other function. And the perfected suburb continues all the way until the beginnings of the 20th century. You're looking on the left at George Widener's Miramar, with its perfected, basically sort of French Versailles plan, designed by Jacques Gerbert, who was the great French landscape architect. And on the right, the center of the business of resorting, which is McKim White's Casino and Tennis Club, which again introduces a whole new realm of architectural ideas, the shingle style that becomes the New England style. The counter to all of this is the elite idea of escaping the modern urban world and heading off into the distant country. And that takes place all the way through from the Adirondacks into Maine, with log houses that are big enough to bring 20 of your friends, because a house with just 2 or 3 people isn't a lot of fun if you're going to be there for the entire summer. But you've got these wonderful wood houses, and you then enjoyed the hiking and the fishing and the sort of personal, private activities that made that type of resort its own thing. Palm Springs basically recapitulates a lot of these narratives. It begins as a Native American hot spring, which was a place that you could be comfortable if you weren't well, if you wanted to be just warm and cozy in the winter. Just a dip in the bath was terrific. But Agua Caliente, not the greatest name. You need something that's more of the time. How do you sell a resort? Well, over in Florida, they were already using palm trees imported from the West Coast to have the image of what a resort was, a place with different landscapes and different tree types. And so when Palm Springs becomes a real estate development as Palm Valley, you begin to get the type of advantage of a name that Atlantic City had given to that resort. And this will be a crucial piece. And then, of course, the other big piece is that beginning in 1876, the railroad arrives. And all of a sudden, you can get from Los Angeles and other centers of population on the California coast to Palm Springs in a reasonable amount of time, 3 or 4 hours, as opposed to multiple days. Some of the stories are that the passengers had to get out and help push the coach, or the horses were having trouble dragging the coach up the hill. You can imagine how much fun that would be. But one of the big kickers was the 1918 flu epidemic, when people began to flee Los Angeles because of the impact of the flu, the killing of millions of Americans. It was very much like the COVID experience. It caused people to begin thinking, how do I escape this evil urban place where I can get sick? The next big change is Henry Ford making millions of cars. One of the interesting things, in 1924, Americans made 3 million cars. All of Europe, Canada, and South America made 300,000 cars. So you think about the impact. The car becomes something that is common in America. In Alan's slide of that Le Corbusier hotel, the automobile costs $7,000 to $10,000, while Henry Ford is selling cars for $600 and $800. So you see the impact that this is going to have on the entire society. And with the United States government then sponsoring road building across the nation in the 1920s to serve this new mechanical contrivance, Palm Springs ends up with highway access between it and Los Angeles and San Diego, making it accessible. And that moment when that road arrives here is the same moment when the Oasis Hotel, already heard a lot about, and the El Mirador, let's keep the Spanish theme of California going, are built here. These are built here in response now to a much larger market. That was Palm Springs 2.0. Palm Springs 4.0 happens in the 1930s when they build an airstrip. And after the airstrip is taken over by the U.S. military during World War II, it's then declared surplus. And there begins to be the question of, maybe you could use that airport to connect Palm Springs to Los Angeles. By the Bob Hope, now named Bob Hope Airport, up there near Hollywood, would mean that you could arrive from Hollywood, once you had the idea in your head and a flight available, in 45 minutes to an hour total trip to the airport, the flight, to where you're going to end up here. It was amazing. And that airport is going to be a big part of the future of the story. The map on the right is really wonderful because they tell you that you could fly from LA to Palm Springs for $5.10. Not bad. And that creates this new experience. The air flights start showing up in the 40s. Fancy houses with fancy people start showing up in the 40s. There's a direct connection between this new market and this new transportation system. And you start to see houses in which the Hollywood crowd, it begins to show up and hire good architects to do interesting houses. I've always loved the Sinatra house with its piano-shaped swimming pool, just a great homage to a great singer. Obviously, the Kaufman House, we all know, but it remains an anchor of modern life into the 70s. And it's also the place that's attracting national celebrities. The Palm Springs Villager is telling you a story about Ben Hogan, who's coming back to Palm Springs. So this becomes, in its own right, a winter suburb on the same order that Newport is a summer suburb. And then there's a great disruption. And the disruption for all of the East Coast resorts is that in 1958 you could suddenly fly from New York to Miami in 2 hours and 15 minutes. And you could equally, if you look at that travel time by air, you could just about make it out to Palm Springs, you could make it to Europe. All of a sudden, you didn't have to deal with the servant problem of staffing your mansion in Newport. You could just abandon it. And you could head off to Europe, to the Alps for skiing, whatever you wanted to do. The jet plane made the world accessible. And it made Miami, all of a sudden, a gigantic resort. Morris Lapidus's spectacular Fontainebleau and Eden Rock hotels are part of the arrival of the jet airplane as a transportation system. Las Vegas goes from a few little motel-like things with big signs to the mega resort that it is today, with 40 million visitors a day or a year showing up. And for Palm Springs, when a certain notable golfer, not named Donald Trump, named Dwight Eisenhower, decides that he wants to take the first Air Force One jet Boeing from Washington to Palm Springs for a golfing holiday, that suddenly means that Palm Springs is connected to the big jet world, and Palm Springs is looking good. Jet travel did terrible things to the old resorts. The Newport mansions were abandoned. Atlantic City was suddenly looking old and tacky in the 1964 Democratic Convention. Cape May was just simply old and cheap, inexpensive, and boring. And so you had to figure out what are we going to do with these resorts? How are we going to tune them up? In Newport, their historical society that had been formed to preserve 18th century Peter Townsend libraries and things, or Peter Harrison, sorry, they suddenly realized that they can buy some of these old mansions and turn them into lifestyles of the rich and famous, available by bus for a $6 fee. That works pretty well. In Atlantic City, they decide to become a casino city, and they become a sort of a subsidiary of Las Vegas, which smartly realizes that they don't want the big new glitzy, glamorous casinos of Las Vegas to be built in Atlantic City. So they build kind of cheap and tacky resorts with cheap and tacky owners. I like the Trump Plaza as the neon began to fade out. And you can see it's a hotel in Cass, but it's actually Eno at the end of that. Cape May figured out something different. They realized that it could become, because it had this great concentration of Victorian resort architecture, it could become a themed resort. And so the result is transformation for Cape May, transformation for Newport, different markets, different narratives. But the big point was that you had to keep your narrative going in media. And somehow Newport has kept itself from high society to the Great Gatsby as a celebration of old American elites. Atlantic City never got past the 1960s and 70s, its mobsters and decay. Cape May, with its funky Victorian, I suspect was thought of as sort of a parallel to the Victorian mansion in Psycho. And so you got some of that. And Miami Vice, of course, told us about drugs and crime as the new fame for Miami. Palm Springs 4.2, still the exotic, lovely suburb, but now also becoming a college bust-out town, gets Palm Springs Weekend that was written so that Alan could have a title for the book. But also got out of hand. 1986 was apparently a bad year to the point that they literally spent time, the city council, outlawing tiny bikinis. You know? Their choice, not mine. By the 1990s, there were problems in paradise. And the big problem was that Palm Springs had always been designed as a winter resort. It wasn't really a summer resort. The houses were designed to be comfortable from more or less November to March. And then you went to your summer place or your city place. You went to different worlds. And all of a sudden, houses like the Kaufman House were being listed for real estate as teardowns that might be improved if you turned it into a Spanish hacienda with arches and things. But the building itself is not of particular value. When they did restore it, what was interesting was how little they could salvage after the building had been covered with air conditioners and all sorts of stuff. Other important houses are being literally just demolished and gone. The Maslin House by Neutra, for example. And all of this now brings you to the transportation collapse as the Southern Pacific Railroad is no longer arriving 8 times a day, is taken over by Amtrak and arrives 3 times a week. And there is the realization that you have this thing called summer, and it's hard to thrive in that. So the big question in Palm Springs 6.0 is, do you renovate or do you appreciate? And mostly they're renovating. They're saying these old houses with a single pane glass, let's fix them up and make them more comfortable. Albert Frey's Guthrie House gets Spanished in pink, as you can see. That begins to change when here in the 21st century, people seeing, I suspect, the success of Cape May as a themed era resort realize that they've got all these mid-century modern buildings. And that's going to be the wonderful opportunity to transform the world here as well. Can we make a tourist event? Can we bring people? And the answer was, as we can see, yes. And that brings us to the 6.1 aestheticized Palm Spring that we're all in here today in Hess Fest. But there are risks. And as someone who's been working on and writing about Cape May for half a century, look what they're doing in Cape May. They're doing fake Victorian as well, the only thing you can build in this Victorian resort. And the fake Victorian's awful, and it's uninteresting, and it doesn't work. And even when you compare it to very simple, ordinary Victorians, they're bloated and not right. The last important building in Cape May was done by Frank Furness in 1878. That's a long time. You're in the same timeline. The last important buildings of your architectural era are the 1970s. Then you had the restoration moment with the Kaufman House. Now you have new and replica. What can go wrong? New and replica get regulated, boards reviewed. There's never been a good building designed by a review board. And the result is, as the Guardian tells us, that the oat, bone, sand, and fawn color palette have a strong anesthetizing effect. There's an issue to keep in mind here. So here's your Palm Springs on the right with buildings of color and delight, but you run the risk of, in a sense, becoming Pleasantville, if you know that wonderful movie from the 1990s in which the kids entered from the present world back into a 1950s sitcom. And they entered a world that had no conflict, no rain, no sex. Basically, just very, very your parents or grandparents' town. That's not what you want. And so that leads you to this question. And I was struck here as I look at this wonderful image of the gas station that is your visitor center with the gas pumps and the Enron sign. And just said, how cool is this building as an actual gas station? And how diminished is it when you put the pubic planting around the base, get rid of the gas tanks and all the elements of the true gas station and turn it into a memorial? That's the question. How does Palm Springs make it into a future? Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. That was such a great morning, wasn't it? We're so lucky to have such wonderful, inspired speakers come to Palm Springs and share their knowledge with us. Well, now it's my great pleasure to introduce Sion Winship. She is a real force in Southern California architectural circles. As a leading architectural historian and writer, she's the president of the Society of Architectural Historians, the Southern California chapter, and is currently on the board of the Neutra Institute of survival through design. Her essay in the book, From Reservation to Real Estate Empire, brings new insights into this aspect of Palm Springs history and really goes so well with what we just heard from George. So please give a warm welcome to Sian Winship.
All right. Well, thank you, Sydney. And thank you for having me here today. And thank you to Alan for allowing me to be a small part of this amazing project and this amazing book. I want to start off with a confession. And it's something that Alan doesn't even know. So Alan called me, whatever it was, 2-3 years ago and said, Sian, we'd like you to contribute an essay to this book. And I was like, oh, this is great. I can't wait. It's going to be on Richard Dorman or one of my other passions. And he says, we want you to write something about the tribe. All I could see, like a deer in the headlights, was the fact that in 1969, when I was in 2nd grade, the only class I have ever gotten a C in was Indians. But I said, sure, Alan, that sounds great. and so I began to embark on this amazing research journey that, frankly, I didn't know where it was going to take us. But it ended with this essay called From Reservation to Real Estate Empire, which I will share with you a little bit about today. So this is the story, of course, of the Agua Caliente band of Coilla Indians, which I will now just simply refer to respectfully as the tribe, but their impact on the architecture of Palm Springs. And again, I had no idea where this research was going to lead. I had previously had the great privilege of working with Ken Lyons in the city of Palm Springs on a Palm Springs historic context statement, where I had written about the demolition of Section 14, and I just didn't know what other aspects of the story were left to be uncovered. And what I really didn't anticipate was this, how remarkable this story of an all-women tribal council transformed the built environment in the city of Palm Springs. And it paved way for the mid-century modern resort development so important in the South End, and it would ultimately make the city more inclusive. So, yes. So it was Tribal Council Chairman Viola Ortner who characterized the tribe situation as land rich and cash poor in a single powerful phrase: you can't eat dirt. Okay, that's the title of her book on the topic. But what it is it's an incredible story of resilience and impact far beyond what they receive credit for. I'm going to pause for just a moment here to be a little bit of a research geek, because I know there's a couple of you out there in TV land. So in my research, I ended up at USC Special Collections, and I found the key document that revealed the important role that the tribe played in the development of the city, and exactly how that came to be. It was such an aha moment that I audibly gasped in Special Collections and made the other researchers turn around. And what I found was this 1962 list of all the long-term leases, their dates, their terms, the tribal members involved, and who were the lessors. And what it revealed was that between 1961 and 1963, 40 new leases were negotiated with the tribe. And by late 1957, there were 53 leases in place for approximately 1,300 acres of land, the vast majority of which was in basically the South End, and the vast majority of which was built upon by members of the Palm Springs School. So to understand this document and its impact, we have to go back to what I like to call the leasing origin story. So back in 1852, the U.S. government imposed a grid on the desert landscape and the tribal home of the Agua Caliente. During the 1860s, the odd-numbered parcels, the 1-mile square parcels of the checkerboard, were given to the Southern Pacific Railroad. And then in 1876, President Grant designated the non-contiguous, even-numbered squares, who thought this was a good idea, as the former Agua Caliente Indian Reservation. So again, those are all the green squares. And what you're going to see as we go through the presentation, we're going to highlight which one of those squares that we're going to be talking about. But control over this land and the tribe's destiny was caught up in governmental red tape for decades. In 1887, Congress passed the General Allotment Act that divided up the land, and it was meant to encourage farming. And that what the practical aspect of that was meant that some of this land was owned collectively by the tribe, and some of this land was owned by individual tribal members. But regardless, the Bureau of Indian Affairs controlled what the tribe could do with the land. They couldn't sell it, and they were only able to lease it for a maximum of 5 years. And this was especially critical for the square here, section 14. The most visible and valuable square of tribal land. As you can see, it's directly adjacent to the plaza, directly adjacent to downtown. And the 5-year lease maximum meant that no one would really lease the tribal land. And the people who did lease for the narrow period of 5 years were primarily the Black and Latino community members who filled the service and construction jobs for this resort city. And frankly, they weren't allowed to live anywhere else. So they constructed mostly vernacular, small homes and structures all over Section 14. Now, after World War II, the resort culture in Palm Springs grew, as we've heard from George and others, and the locals grew kind of dissatisfied with the structures on Section 14. You know, they labeled it a shanty town, an eyesore, all kinds of things. And city officials were instrumental for years in evicting those residents, and ultimately they set it on fire during the 1960s when people were away from home at their jobs. It's a truly awful story with no heroes, and I encourage you to visit the Agua Caliente Cultural Museum to view the excellent exhibit and that on this aspect of the tribe's history. I was just finally there, and it was really remarkable. But I digress. So despite this idea that in 1891, the Mission Indian Relief Act authorized parcels to individual Agua Caliente members, nothing happened. It's the great story of government, right? Nothing happens. So during 1930s, 50 members of the tribe sued the government over the failed allotment program and the tribe's inability to do anything productive with their own land. They lost. After that, this man, sorry, he's a little blurry, but I had to have him in here. Tribal member Lee Arenas filed a suit of his own, and he lost. But in 1944, the appeal went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he won. Yes, hurrah. Back to the bad news. The victory was short-lived. And in a court judgment, because he had no money to pay for his legal representation, they ordered him to sell some of his land. So this is the first time that the Bureau of Indian Affairs approved the sale of tribal land to private interests. Enter the Alexanders. His land was in Section 26, so in the south end, directly below the 111 curve. And some of it was purchased by the Alexander Construction Company and resulted in the development of Twin Palms. The first, obviously, mid-century modern collaboration between the Alexanders and the architects Palmer Kreisel. That's, of course, Bill Kreisel, who I'm contractually obligated to always show a picture of anytime I speak. The other thing to keep in mind about this is that everyone involved, the Alexanders, Bill, everyone involved in Twin Palms was Jewish. And so it became one of the earliest developments without restrictive covenants and open for sales to Jewish buyers who were discouraged from buying in Palm Springs, really kind of through a system of de facto discrimination. And I will take you back just for a moment to the first weekend I ever spent in Palm Springs, which was probably 1985, in a home somewhere in the South End, I do not know at this point, with friends of mine who were Jewish. It was owned by his parents, and I remembered him saying at the time, this is the only place we can buy. This is the only part of Palm Springs that we're really allowed to be in. And it kind of washed over me at that moment, but it never left me, and it was certainly important as I was doing this research. But in 1951, the tribal chief at the time, Albert Potencio, died. And Viola Ortner, who was actually, her name was Ollinger at the time, rose from her position on the tribal council to chair, and she served in that capacity for 7 years. Now, she was an extremely smart woman. She recognized immediately that the tribe would never be able to use the highest, or get the highest and best use out of their land with a 5-year lease provision. She testified frequently in Congress to this effect and was ultimately successful in getting Public Law 255 passed, which raised the lease ceiling from 5 to 25 years with an option for 25 more. She also had the foresight to engage the firm of Victor Gruen and Associates to develop a master plan for Section 14. So here is that master plan. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with Gruen, he was a real thought leader in master planning and also credited with the development of the modern shopping mall, earning national recognition for Southland Shopping Center in suburban Minneapolis as the first air-conditioned shopping mall in the United States. So what did Gruen suggest for Section 14? Well, he recognized strategically how important that land was relative to downtown Palm Springs, and he encouraged a wide range of development types: hotels, golf courses, residential club areas with single-family residences and apartments, a community center, a recreation center, a convention center, a tribal office, and of course, a shopping center. And he thought that this was the perfect opportunity for a $100 million project that should be undertaken by one developer. And in the master plan, there are these beautiful renderings of the mid-century modern buildings that Gruen envisioned would be part of Section 14 and would be, part of the legacy of the tribe to modern architecture. So this one is actually his rendering, the Gruen rendering for the tribal offices, which of course were never realized. Here's a Gruen rendering of the proposed hotel, also never realized. And so unfortunately, the development of Section 14 required the cooperation of several individual tribal members. So again, these allotees that had little pieces and parts of the land, they all had to collaborate in order to make this master plan happen. And who could blame them? After decades, literally, of discrimination and civil rights violations, many, many members of the tribe were distrustful of a master plan, even one put forth by, Viola Ortner. And by 1958, the Gruen master plan was pretty much dead in the water. And the 25-year lease term, while helpful, was still not really useful for most developers. So Ortner saw that she couldn't have all of her eggs in the Gruen basket, and she saw, on a parallel path, she began negotiations for a spa with this gentleman, Chicago-based developer Sam Banowit. So this is the only guy who saw the promise of a 25-year lease and a 25-year option after that. And still, the lease negotiations took 3 years and 11 lease drafts before the government would authorize the deal. And so Banowit developed 8.5 acres as a bathhouse spa and subsequently the Palm Springs Spa Hotel by architect Bill Cody. It opened in January of 1960, just in time for the season, and it drew national attention and a celebrity clientele, enhancing Palm Springs' reputation as a celebrity mecca. And the lease terms with Banowit also established the fact that the tribe would get 5% of gross receipts, 1% of food sales, and 5% of any subleases. So this was a groundbreaking deal that really paved the way for the tribe in Palm Springs. So now we're going to take a look at Section 26. So here we are south of the 111 curve again. And so one of the things that I discovered in this research through that document was how tribal leased land was instrumental to one of the sort of character-defining features we know of Palm Springs, which is the upscale trailer park. So this is the Sahara Trailer Park, which was established on the land, former land rather, of Leorinus. And it was the perfect business model because you didn't really have any permanent structures. Maybe you had a little cabana, a little guardhouse or something like that, a little office, something like that. And everything was movable. So the lease fell apart. In a few years, everything was fine. Soon, more and more and more of these developments, trailer park developments, started to happen. So Sahara was followed by Hacienda, Orchard Trailer Park, Horizon Trailer Village Rancho, Tucky's Canyon Park, and Sahara was known as the jeweled showcase of mobile living by the Palm Springs villager. And so here's just a modern example of how this continues on today. And what distinguished these trailer parks was not only were there new amenities and some really good architecture in particular, but planning. Instead of a sort of happenstance arrangement of movable trailers, the planners developed ways to place them on the land that was much more pleasing. There were landscaped areas. This was really trailer park living at its most glamorous. Still, Viola Ortner knew that these lease terms needed to be longer than 25 and 25 to stimulate any real development and interest. So the tribe held another key at this time to the development of Palm Springs, and George talked about it, the importance of the airport. So the tribe held sections 12 and 18, and after World War II, the city purchased the land from the tribe to build the airport for $3 million. This is an unfortunate fold one found in the USC Special Collections, but here is Audrey Wellness on the cover of the National Sunday Supplement magazine as one of the youngest millionaires to be a recipient of the city buying the land for the airport. And of course, you know, the beautiful Palm Springs Airport, mid-century modern gateway that we know today. In 1959, President Eisenhower, Ike at that point, signed the Equalization Act, and finally the Long-Term Leasing Act, which extended a 99-year leasing provision to the tribe. And it was a game changer. And so even though these lease deals were really complex and it took a lot of time to put them together, it was now viable. So here you can see, we're looking into section 26, there in the center of the screen. You can see Twin Palms, you can see the Sahara Trailer Park there. And now we are here looking backwards the other direction with the development of the $50 million Canyon Country Club by Robert Grunt, another Jewish developer from New York. He negotiated a 70-year lease. The land that he developed there was owned by some 25 families and took more than a year of negotiations. And again, another lease deal that was 3 inches thick. He talks a great deal about it. How it was the most difficult deal of his life, if you will. But this really begins, he builds a golf course, and this really begins to pave the way for golf and leisure culture. It was already taking the country by storm. You know, Eisenhower was known as the golfing president. He loved coming out here, and he helped popularize the sport. And so this large footprint of Indian land that was available on these parcels paved the way for Palm Springs to really be a golf community and to flourish. The success of Canyon Country Club drew other developers to the area, including Roy Fay of Ukrainian Jewish heritage. He came to Palm Springs in the mid-50s by the way of Chicago. He was an early proponent of condominiums, and he jumped into development on tribal land. In 1961, he built Canyon View Estate Cooperative Apartments on a 55-year lease, and he hired Palmer and Kreisel to design them. By this time, the practice was essentially split, and Bill was doing all the work that was here, and Dan Sexton Palmer was doing all the non-Palm Springs projects. But Fay is on record saying that, you know, developing homes at the time on the tribal land was really tricky because banks wouldn't loan on them. And so it took a series of these really well-connected, wealthy Midwestern Jewish and East Coast developers to be able to fund all these projects. The Alexanders couldn't do it because the Alexanders were moving literally from development to development in order to finance them. But these guys put together this wealthy syndicate of mostly Midwesterners and East Coasters. And Roy Fay ended up doing more lease deals with the tribe than anyone else. So here we see now our development is now kind of spilling over into section 30, another even numbered parcel. And so this, of course, is Seven Lakes Country Club. Seven Lakes Country Club is the very first master planned golf community with condominiums in the Palm Springs area and in the entire Coachella Valley. I just spent some time researching all of this. And it was developed by Johnny Dawson, who selected Richard Harrison to design the duplexes. And these long, low, horizontally massed duplex units again become an icon of modern architecture in the desert. Another nice shot, Seven Lakes. And then Bill Cody was hired to design the Seven Lakes clubhouse. So you're beginning to see how all of the masters of the Palm Springs School are building simultaneously in the South End. And it even started to affect what was being built on non-tribal land. So here's a project by A. Quincy Jones from 1965. This is Country Club Estates, which was not on tribal land. This is, again, another low-density 30-unit development from 1965. And Jones is playing off of what he's seeing happen down in the South End with the Palm Springs School. Before we know it, Bob Grunt is on to his next project down there after the success of Candy Country Club. And so he returns to develop Kings Point with Bill Kreisel. And of course, Kings Point has its own little golf area as well. Here's a fairway elevation. And then in 1969, Fay developed his own golf course community on the leased land of Canyon Estates. He built a 9-hole executive golf course, tennis courts, 11 swimming pools, and for this development he worked with Charles Dubois into the early 1970s. So Roy Fay's son, Bob Fay, became a partner in the family business, and before Bob passed away, Bob used to give talks around town about Jewish history in Palm Springs. And Bob talked openly. I was very fortunate that his daughter very graciously gave me the notes of his talks to groups around town. And he talked very openly about the anti-Semitism that he and his father experienced in the desert communities. Some hoteliers prevented guests who were Jewish from staying in those hotels. Even celebrities like Jack Benny were not permitted. And in fact, some Jewish-only hotels were created by some owners as a result of that. Another example was Tony Curtis, who was born Bernie Schwartz, was not allowed to play tennis at Palm Springs Tennis Club. And as I'm sure many of you know, Tamara's Country Club and the Racket Club were started because Jews couldn't play golf or tennis in some of these institutions. So in conclusion, without the vision of this amazing group of women tribal leaders, Palm Springs would not be the Palm Springs that we know it today. It would be a very different place. Even Viola Ortner ultimately bought a mid-century modern home in a Roy Fay development in the South End. So I guess everything that goes around comes around. But for me, after my C in Indians, it was bittersweet that the decades of civil rights violations and the government-sanctioned delays and delays and delays, that it took an all-woman tribal council to pave the way for what we know to be Palm Springs today, and to largely be the built environment that we credit the Palm Springs School with. Palm Springs is a hub of mid-century modern design, as we know. It's a world-class golf destination. It's a demonstration project for upscale trailer parks. And it's a very diverse community. And we thank the ladies of the Agua Caliente for all of that. Thank you so much.
If you ask Sion to research something, you're going to get it. And she did in spades. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ken Lyon. So where would we be in this city if Ken Lyon had not provided the expertise in guiding us through our preservation efforts? Initially as Associate City Planner, and then as the first preservation officer, historic preservation officer, he has overseen vast changes in how preservation is understood in this community. As a licensed architect who holds a master's degree in city planning, his work and his essay illustrate his valued insights. So please welcome Ken Lyon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the museum. Thank you to Palm Springs Architectural Alliance. Special thanks to Palm Springs Historical Society, because you can't do storytelling in this town without their wonderful collection of information and photos. So thank you for having me. As Sydney already mentioned, I've worked for the city's planning department for about 19 years. During that time, I've served as the city's Historic Preservation Board liaison, and as she mentioned, the city's first Historic Preservation Officer. I now serve in the position of Principal City Planner and Urban Designer, and I am the staff liaison now to the city's Architectural Review Board. I'm going to talk in terms of some different aspects of architecture. My conversations today are going to be around tract home development and commercial development. And I have 20 minutes to talk about 100 years, so here we go. I'm not going to give you the story of how preservation helped save all these great buildings, but rather I'm going to tell you about the three factors that were present in Palm Springs at the middle of the 20th century. Those three factors, environment, attitudes, and architects, converged here to create a place like no place else. The second trio, locals, newcomers, and preservation, are equally important to the story of Palm Springs. In the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to ask you to think about Palm Springs as we approach the middle of the 21st century, and whether the convergence of those factors was merely a remarkable moment or the start of a movement that has yet to bloom and flourish. So first, let's talk about the environment. Palm Springs in the early part of the 20th century was a small town in the shadow of a big mountain at the edge of a vast desert. This was the environment in which our story begins. For some context, our permanent population in the 30s was around 1,500. Since the early 1900s, Palm Springs has been a destination for adventurous souls. A group of individuals, poets, painters, writers, photographers, and other artists discovered the beauty of the desert environment. This loose-knit group of individuals built simple tent cabins scattered along the base of the mountain. They became known as the Creative Brotherhood. Their art, which found its way into galleries back east and across the Atlantic, brought an awareness to this unique place. Curious travelers and tourists who had heard about Palm Springs eagerly came to explore the vast desert environment. And I'm going to ask you to pay attention to that little white thing right there. We'll talk about it in a little bit. And soon more tourists came. So in 1925, Pearl McManus, the daughter of the first non-native settler, John McCullum, hired a young architect named Lloyd Wright, who is not to be mistaken for his father, Frank Lloyd Wright, to design a very unique new hotel. The Oasis Hotel brought a new level of sophistication and a new way of thinking about desert architecture. And the little village slowly began to change. Nellie Kaufman, who came to the Palm Springs in about 1909, wasted no time replacing the old tent cabins at the Desert Inn with comfortable new accommodations in buildings designed in 1928 by William Charles Tanner of Los Angeles. But as you can see, the vast open desert environment was still just steps away. Look at how seemingly endless this desert was, even into the 20s and 30s. Today, the Rowan Hotel and the new downtown buildings are on the site of the old Desert Inn. About the same time, a Colorado cattle rancher named Prescott Stevens, who had come here a few years earlier, hired architects Walker and Eisen to design the luxurious El Mirador Hotel on what was then the outskirts north of town. Well, by now you figured out that little white object in the earlier photo was the tower of the El Mirador Hotel. If you were a guest at the El Mirador in the 1930s, this was the environment around you. A seemingly endless flat desert with majestic mountains in the distance. And still more tourists came. And the place began to grow and glitter as the movie stars and moguls of Hollywood began to discover the desert environment of Palm Springs. In 1938, the city was incorporated. Seeing Palm Springs by the numbers tells the story. This small village of Palm Springs that you see in the left was booming, having more than doubled in population by the 1940s. By the 50s, the population had doubled again, and we were well on our way. This is the environment of Palm Springs today. The photo was taken from roughly the same spot that earlier photo of the El Mirador Hotel was taken, sitting out in the middle of that empty desert. Our population now is about 45,000, and there is the El Mirador Hotel. The second part of the three factors I want to talk to you about was attitude. In the context of my story, attitude, I mean cultural attitudes, social attitudes, and attitudes about style. Let's take a look at how attitudes evolved from the dusty little early days through the mid-20th century. Most early travelers came to Palm Springs by train, but by the 40s, paved highways were the way to get to Palm Springs. After the long drive, relaxing poolside was usually the first priority. However, the early attitudes of the dusty little town hadn't faded away completely. In the 20s and 30s, cowboy culture was the attitude in Palm Springs. A walk downtown with the whole family in Western wear was a must. And at the Polo Grounds, now Sunrise Park, roping, riding, and rustling brought out the cheering crowds. But the town was still growing, and the attitudes were shifting. People wanted things new and modern. We saw the greatest shift in attitudes and stylistic preferences after World War II. Revival-style buildings from the 20s and 30s were literally transformed from one season to the next, with modern facades like this in 1947 simply covering up the old pre-war buildings. This one, known simply as The Center by architects Paul R. Williams and A. Quincy Jones, transformed the center of town in 1947 with this project. In the courtyard behind, the new Town and Country restaurant became the fashionable place to meet and dine. And there is the center, and there is the interior of that restaurant. By the 40s and 50s, wealthy celebrities, tennis, fashion shows, and cocktails by the pool replaced cowboys on the trail. Bullock's department store at the Desert Inn from the late 1920s gave way in 1947 to the new Bullock's department store designed by architects Wordman and Beckett. Stylish, sophisticated, and decidedly modern. We'll talk later about this one-of-a-kind building. An optimistic American attitude had emerged after the war, open to new ideas and certain of the benefits of technology. Drawn by the need for new buildings, young architects, fresh out of architecture school, eager to try something other than the tired revival styles of the past, came to Palm Springs. And that brings us to the third factor of this magical mid-century moment, the architects. It is said that architecture is an old man's profession, and by the look of this grouchy-looking group of famous architects, you'd have to admit there's probably some truth to that. Some members of the profession insist that the only way that the gained experience of a lifelong career can an architect truly rise to the level of greatness. But the architects who came to Palm Springs that we celebrate today were young in comparison. What they lacked in career experience, they more than made up with innate talent. I'm going to quickly show you 5 of the better-known local architects from the mid-20th century. Don Wexler, one of our most celebrated architects, came to Palm Springs in the mid-20th century, moved here when he was 26 after studying architecture at the University of Minnesota. 2 years later, on Liliana Road, he showed us how to create dramatic architecture with simple lines and an economical post and beam structure. In 1960, at the age 34, he showed us how well-designed tract homes using light gauge steel and factory prefabrication could be brought to the market at an economical price point. And how many architects by age 40 have designed an entire airport terminal? This was the type of commissions that were available for these young architects, what they found available in Palm Springs, and it's quite remarkable. Bill Cody graduated from the architecture school at the University of Southern California, moved to Palm Springs at age 28. In his 1946 design for the Del Marcos Hotel at age 29, you see his influence of Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin West, which we saw earlier. But his design aesthetic continued to grow and evolve. He eventually designed, as you see here with the Goldberg residence, an impossibly thin structure, and which earned him the nickname of the King of Thin. E. Stewart Williams graduated from architecture school at Cornell University, got his master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania, moved to Palm Springs at age 38. Not bad. His first commission here was for the home for Frank Sinatra, and the later one-of-a-kind Idris house that he did in 1954. Hugh Captor, a graduate of the Lawrence Institute of Technology in Detroit, moved to Palm Springs at age 25, created captivating geometric compositions like the Impala Lodge at age 27, the famous Burgess residence in the same year, and at age 33, the fast-looking aesthetic for fast-living actor Steve McQueen. Although I couldn't find a younger photo of Barry Burkus in his younger years, he arrived here at age 21. In 1960, at the age of 25, Burkus used a new technology of pre-stressed roof panels to give the Park Imperial South and Marino Manor condos their distinctive folded plate roof. Then, in 1970, at age 35, Burkus pivoted and showed his equal design competence with his own interpretation of Cliff May's classic California ranch as the last portion of the old 1930s Deepwell Guest Ranch became Deepwell Ranch condominiums. So the point about the architects that I want to leave you with is this. Most of these architects who came to Palm Springs in the mid-20th century were not masters in their profession. They were young, talented, and inspired, and they met the needs, demands, and opportunities of their time with a sense, as the Roman architect Vitruvius would say, of firmness, commodity, and most certainly delight. I'd now like to turn your attention to the other three factors of the Palm Springs story: locals, newcomers, and preservation. The rare convergence of the three factors that I just talked about, environment, attitude, and architects, brought us to where we're at. But the story and the evolution of the preservation in Palm Springs is something I now need you to understand, and the story begins with locals. In 1955, socialite Melba Bennett established the Palm Springs Historical Society, which collects stories and ephemera documenting the beginnings and evolution of this little village in the desert. You see, there was an awareness, a self-confidence, a pride of place among the locals, and a recognition that this place was not like any other desert city or resort destination. Its uniqueness was self-recognized and fiercely defended. Case in point. On the front page of the September 1967 edition of Palm Springs Life magazine, an eye-catching headline, "Garish gas stations? Not in Palm Springs." The city had at that time what I will call a very bold "I am" self-image. It wasn't just sunshine and swimming pools that made Palm Springs like no place else. The people who came here and voluntarily served in the activities of city government on the Planning Commission and the Architectural Advisory Committee set a high standard for themselves. I just hit this one, was making sure I wasn't messing this up. They set a high standard for themselves and for those corporate entities who wanted to be here. They didn't have to fear economic competition from other places because in some ways there wasn't any, until the golf course and gated communities down valley began to challenge the city's monopoly. I want to read a section out of that article from the Palm Springs Life magazine. Palm Springs this year showed itself a forerunner in a trend which other cities are expected to follow, the idea of making service stations decorative as well as functional. And later on in that report, at one of the meetings, an oil company representative presented a plan of their standard design with few modifications, but during the presentation, the advisory committee stated the proposed plans were not acceptable. The company representative immediately went out to his car, brought in a complete new set of plans prepared by a local architect, and got his approval. So I guess the point I want to make here is, oops, I'm sorry. Why is that not coming for me? My question here is, was it worth it? And let me just slide this up a bit, I'm sorry. It was worth it. And what I'm trying to point there, and I guess I've got myself a little bit mixed up here. Oops, I've lost everything. Oh. Okay, I need to do it just backwards a minute. Let's move forward. Anyways, these gas stations set the stage, and it really was a time when we were establishing ourselves and saying, this kind of design architecture is important. And so that's my point. 2 of those gas stations from that period, of the 3 that are still surviving, are now Class 1 historic sites. Was it worth it? You decide. So, in the 70s and 80s, we saw development interest beginning to move down valley, where cheap land enabled golf courses and development of gated communities. The national shift in retailing from traditional downtowns to new enclosed air conditioning shopping malls brought a painful economic uncertainty to Palm Springs. Instead of being a trendsetter, Palm Springs found itself desperately trying to keep up, copying the development trends of golf course communities and replacing the one-of-a-kind Desert Inn to build an enclosed air-conditioned shopping mall. If I can get that picture up. That was all but dead by the early 2000s and demolished in 2013. The Palm Springs trend-setting attitude of I am from the 1960s became the Me Too attitude of the 80s as Palm Springs tried to keep up. The collection of post-war buildings that had sprung up here after World War II began to feel small, old, and dated. And so the modernist tract homes and buildings simply sat, empty and baking in the sun. So that moves us to a new story, a story of preservation, Palm Springs style, that had a very humble beginning. Unlike the monumental loss of Penn Station in 1963 that launched the national preservation movement, it was the demolition of a tiny ticket booth in the front of the Plaza Theater that triggered the preservation movement in Palm Springs. The little ornate ticket booth at the Plaza Theater is part of La Plaza. La Plaza, as you heard earlier, was the vision of newcomer Julia Carnell, the wealthy heiress of the National Cash Register fortune who came to Palm Springs from Dayton, Ohio, as you learned earlier, and stayed at Nellie Kaufman's Desert Inn. Julia brought Harry Williams and made her vision a reality. Williams designed what is believed to be one of the earliest mixed-use shopping centers in Southern California. And imagine an 800-seat theater for a town of 1,500. They either had tremendous hubris or they had a pretty good sense of where Palm Springs was headed. But indeed, the ticket booth was gone. In the late 70s, the Metropolitan Theater Company had leased the Plaza Theater from then-owner Earl Strebe. Seeking to increase their revenue by showing more than one movie at a time, they tore out the ticket booth, constructed a wall down the middle of the theater, splitting it in 2. The loss of the little ticket booth outraged many in the community, among them City Council member Bill Foster, who declared, "We have very few sites like this left, and if we don't do something soon, there won't be anything left to save." At Foster's insistence, the City Council tasked City Librarian Henry Weiss to lead a committee of locals to study other cities' preservation ordinances and to make a recommendation. And in 1981, the city's first historic preservation ordinance was established. Today, the Plaza Theater is once again the center of the preservation movement in Palm Springs. Led by former City Council member J.R. Roberts, a foundation comprised of mostly local citizens has raised over $16 million to help restore the Plaza Theater, and they're hard at work to raise another $10 million to completely restore the beloved Plaza Theater. After the passage of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, the city's the first building designated was the El Mirador Hotel Tower, which we saw earlier in 1981. This was followed by many other firsts in Palm Springs architectural history: the McCullum Adobe, the Cornelia White House, the Oasis Hotel, and the city's library. This is what I think is an important point about this building. What does it say about a city's values and attitudes when the citizens' first building that they decide they need to build is a library, not a fire station, not a city hall? I think it speaks tones to the attitude and thoughtfulness that this city had. So here's where I want to introduce you to the second factor in Palm Springs preservation story: the newcomers. As developers moved down valley and built golf course communities and enclosed shopping malls, it was the newcomers who rediscovered the amazing collection of architecture from the earliest part of the century that had been left behind. Our articles in Vanity Fair and other culture and fashion magazines with an international reach touted why Palm Springs was again, as the headline at the top says, hot, hot, hot. People back east in New York, Chicago, Miami, and elsewhere began to sit up and take notice. At the same time, there was a large number of gay men from San Francisco and other cities whose social communities were being decimated by the AIDS pandemic migrated here. They, along with their friends and loved ones, sought the quiet refuge of warm Palm Springs. The amazing desert architecture of our mid-20th century buildings were being picked up at bargain prices, and the rebirth of Palm Springs as a center of art, design, fashion, and culture was well underway. That brings me to one of the newcomers who I had the privilege of knowing, Robert Imber. As Jim Powers wrote in the Palm Springs Life magazine upon Robert's passing, Imber was the best ambassador of architecture Palm Springs could ever hope for, and the truer words could not be spoken. Robert wasn't an architect, but his curiosity and his enthusiasm for all things architectural had no equal. In his words, I was just born loving architecture. He asked, why are things different here? And then he was driven to uncover the story that provided the answers. Robert's mantra, educate, 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 is forever etched in my brain. And for him, we owe a great debt of gratitude. So it was the newcomers who brought the awareness to the buildings we now celebrate as prime examples of the Palm Springs School of Architecture and to the extraordinary talent of the young architects from the mid-20th century who, perhaps without knowing, had created an architecture in the desert that was modern but uniquely different. This is their success story, and these are some of the early successes that they were able to bring forward. Of course, with the successes have come some losses. And these are a few of my favorite buildings that have been lost or altered beyond recognition. I had shown you a little bit earlier, the Bullock's department store is over on the far right side there, lost in the 90s. Like Robert Imber, in time, many of the newcomers will become locals. The environment and attitude and architects will continue to change. I believe there was a rare convergence of environment, attitude, and architects that created the Palm Springs that we celebrate today. And it was the locals and the newcomers, passionate about preservation, who rekindled a powerful sense of pride of place, in which Palm Springs again is asserting, I am. But as we approach the middle of the 21st century, the pressures of a growing population, competition from other desert tourist destinations, the ups and downs and uncertainty of economic boom and bust cycles of the past 20 years have caused some of those dedicated people who serve in local government to lower the bar for architecture that is passable. We begrudgingly accept mediocre architecture, believing that if we don't let them build it, the tourist and the revenue won't come. How ironic. We survived those dismal times, but it isn't the architecture from that mediocre period in the 70s that's put us back on the map. It's that stuff that is like no place else in a world that is becoming more and more like one another, no place else. Or, I'm sorry, like any place else. So my question, will the tract home development that is being built today in Palm Springs sustain our position through the 21st century as one of the top centers of the world's great architectures? Maybe yes, maybe no. Yes, we had lots of tract development in the mid-20th century that shaved costs to the bone, just like today. I'm sorry, I'm using my... Okay, bear with me just a minute because my notes are fading away from me again. Well, we had the same kind of conditions then that we do now. There was repetition in the design of the individual units that helped control costs, just like today. There was an issue of using materials that were very economical, just like today. So why why are we ending up with this kind of architecture today? The folded plate roofs of the 1950s were real roofs, not stuck-on pieces. Stone was stone, not a thin veneer. Butterfly roofs were actually the roofs, not sloped parapets. Real clear-story windows provided privacy and framed views, not double-hung windows looking out at a 6-foot-high block wall separating neighbors from each other. Homes were simple forms, not busy, complicated volumes. Spacious interiors were achieved by opening rooms to the underside of a gently sloped roof, not 10-foot ceilings, 8-foot-high doors, and living rooms the size of a hotel lobby. We're seeing tract home developers and their architects put together architecture like it's a kit of parts, which I would argue is leading us to this kind of Mr. Potato Head architecture. I think it's time for us to hit the reset button, refocus on requiring simpler, smaller, and true desert modern architecture that reflects the tenets of the Palm Springs School of Architecture. And in our commercial development, are we going to be like no place else or like any place else? This is the same location, a few years apart from one another. Also, each of our mediocre neighborhood shopping centers from the Me Too era of the 80s and 90s are seeing new development pressure to build out the pad sites or to replace obsolete buildings. And each one represents an opportunity for those of us who live here and voluntarily serve in the activities of our city government to once again, as they did in the 60s, raise the bar and require developers and national chains who want to be here to do better architecture. A mediocre shopping center doesn't need to remain mediocre if we incrementally improve them with those new pad buildings. Where are the tract home architects and the architects of our neighborhood commercial centers who are creating the Class 1 historic sites of the 21st century? I don't know, but maybe the solution lies in AI. From a 20-minute online search, I found these AI-generated homes expressing the characteristics of the Palm Springs School of Architecture in both single-story and two-story housing types. Listen, in my job, I do the design review on current development applications for dozens, if not hundreds, of tract homes and commercial development. I have not seen new tract home designs that express this degree of simplicity, clarity, restraint, proportion, and strength in what you're seeing in those designs. We can and must do better if we want to be anything more than a footnote in the history of architecture. Maybe AI will be the pattern books of the 19th century, guiding developers and inexperienced architects on best design practices that will allow the Palm Springs School to blossom and flourish into the 21st century. So let's wrap up. I'll leave you with this question which I posed in my essay. Was this a convergence of environment, attitude, and architects that happened in the middle of the 20th century, merely a moment in time that has come and gone? Or is it the beginning of a movement, a new school of architecture? Thank you.